The certified letter felt like holding a loaded gun. My hands trembled as I stared at the number printed in bold red ink, $547,000 in accumulated parking violations. Patricia Hawthorne's signature was scrawled at the bottom with a kind of flourish that screamed vindictive satisfaction. What she didn't know, what none of the Lakewood HOA board knew, was that I owned Superior Parking Solutions, the very company they'd hired to enforce their draconian parking regulations. And in exactly 48 hours, I was going to use that secret to watch Patricia's entire world burn. But this story starts 6 months earlier, with a lie that would cost Patricia everything she thought she controlled. It was a perfect Saturday morning in May when I first encountered Patricia Hawthorne. I was loading my kayak onto the roof of my Honda Pilot in the Lakewood Community Center parking lot, the same lot I'd been using for lake access every weekend for 3 years. The morning sun sparkled across Pine Lake's surface, and I could already feel the stress of my corporate job melting away. That's when I heard the sharp staccato of designer heels on asphalt behind me. "Excuse me," came a voice that could freeze boiling water. "You're parked in a resident-only space." I turned around to see a woman in her early 50s, perfectly styled silver hair, wearing a crisp white polo shirt with Lakewood HO, a board president, embroidered in navy blue. She was holding an iPhone like a weapon, already taking photos of my license plate. "I'm sorry," I said, checking the parking space. "I don't see any resident-only signage." Patricia Hawthorne, though she hadn't introduced herself yet, smiled with the warmth of a shark. "The signage was installed yesterday. All parking spots within 50 feet of lake access are now restricted to Lakewood residents only, by order of the HOA board." She gestured to a small white sign mounted on a thin metal post that I definitely hadn't seen when I parked. The print was so small, you'd need binoculars to read it from more than 10 feet away. "Ma'am, I live in Pine Ridge Estates, right across the street. I've been using this parking lot for years." "Pine Ridge Estates is not part of the Lakewood Homeowners Association," Patricia said, snapping another photo. "Therefore, you're trespassing on private HOA property." My blood pressure started climbing. "This is a public community center. The parking lot serves the entire Pine Lake recreational area." Patricia's laugh was like fingernails on a chalkboard. "Mr. Davidson, Marcus Davidson. Mr. Davidson, the Lakewood HOA purchased exclusive parking management rights from the county last month. We now control all parking enforcement for this facility." She pulled out a citation book and started writing. "That'll be $150 for unauthorized use of resident parking, plus $50 for failure to display proper residential permits." I watched her write the ticket with growing disbelief. "Permits? What permits?" "Lakewood residents can purchase annual parking permits for $300. Non-residents." She paused for dramatic effect. "Non-residents aren't eligible for permits at any price." She tore off the citation and handed it to me with obvious satisfaction. "You have 30 days to pay, or the fine doubles." "And Mr. Davidson?" "Don't let me catch you here again without proper authorization." As Patricia clicked away in her white Mercedes, I stood there holding a $200 parking ticket for using a lot I'd considered public property. But what really burned me wasn't the money, it was the smug certainty in her voice that she'd won something. That afternoon, I did what any reasonable person would do. I researched the hell out of Patricia Hawthorne and her parking scheme. What I found made my stomach turn. Over the past year, the Lakewood HOA had systematically taken control of recreational parking throughout the Pine Lake area. They'd convinced the county to grant them parking management authority under the guise of reducing congestion and improving safety. But their real goal was revenue generation through aggressive ticketing of non-residents. The HOA's own meeting minutes, which I found posted on their website, revealed their strategy in black and white. They projected generating over $500,000 annually through parking fines and permit fees. Patricia had literally turned lake access into a profit center. But here's where Patricia made her first crucial mistake. She assumed I was just another weekend warrior who'd pay the fine and find somewhere else to recreate. She had no idea I was the CEO of Superior Parking Solutions, a company I'd built from scratch over the past 8 years. We managed parking enforcement for shopping centers, airports, and municipal facilities across 3 states. Annual revenue, $12 million. And we'd just signed a contract to provide parking enforcement services for the Lakewood Homeowners Association. The irony was so perfect it almost hurt. Patricia had hired my company to ticket me, but I wasn't ready to reveal that card yet. First, I wanted to see exactly how far Patricia would push her parking tyranny. Because the more aggressive she became, the more ammunition I'd have when it came time to destroy her. Over the following weeks, I watched Patricia's enforcement scheme evolve into something that bordered on harassment. She'd stationed herself in the parking lot every weekend morning, prowling between cars like a predator hunting for violations. Non-resident vehicles were ticketed within minutes of parking. Patricia had somehow convinced the county to allow HOA towing authority, so cars without proper permits disappeared faster than free donuts at a police station. But her masterpiece of vindictive pettiness came when she started targeting residents who dared to question her authority. I witnessed this firsthand on a Tuesday evening when I drove by the community center on my way home from work. Patricia was having a heated argument with an elderly man beside a tow truck that was hooking up a faded blue Honda Civic. I pulled over to watch the confrontation, recognizing the man as Harold Chen, a Lakewood resident I'd chatted with while launching my kayak several times. "Patricia, this is my grandson's car," Harold was saying, his voice shaky with age and anger. "He's visiting from college. He's been here 30 minutes. Mr. Chen, visitor parking requires pre-registration with the HOA office," Patricia replied, checking something on her clipboard. "Your grandson failed to follow proper procedures. The fine is $300 plus $200 towing fee. $500 for parking in my own neighborhood?" Patricia's smile was pure poison. "Perhaps next time your family will read the HOA newsletters more carefully. Ignorance of the rules isn't an excuse." As the tow truck drove away with Harold's grandson's car, the old man stood there looking defeated. $500 might as well have been $5 million for someone on a fixed income. That's when I decided Patricia Hawthorne had pushed her parking scheme exactly far enough. The next morning, I called my operations manager, Lisa Rodriguez. "Lisa, I need you to pull the contract file for Lakewood HOA. Specifically, the enforcement protocols and revenue sharing agreement." "Boss, is there a problem with the account?" "Not yet, but there's about to be." When Lisa sent me the contract details, I discovered that Patricia had negotiated one of the most aggressive enforcement agreements I'd ever seen. The HOA kept 85% of all fines collected, while Superior Parking Solutions provided the infrastructure, equipment, and personnel for just 15%. Most of our municipal clients split revenue 50-50, with the parking authority keeping the larger share to reinvest in public services. Patricia's deal was pure profit extraction with zero community benefit. But buried in the contract language was a clause that would become Patricia's downfall. Superior Parking Solutions retained sole discretion over enforcement priorities, violation categories, and fine structures within applicable legal limits. In other words, as the parking company owner, I had complete control over how aggressively the HOA's regulations were enforced. Patricia had literally hired me to be her executioner. But I wasn't ready to swing the axe just yet. I wanted to document every aspect of her scheme, because when I brought her down, I wanted to make sure she couldn't hurt anyone else ever again. Over the next month, I conducted what I called reconnaissance missions to the lake parking lot. I'd arrive early on Saturday mornings and watch Patricia work, noting her enforcement patterns and documenting her interactions with residents and visitors. What I observed was systematic harassment disguised as rule enforcement. Patricia had created a maze of parking regulations so complex that compliance was nearly impossible. Different zones had different time limits. Visitor permits required 24-hour advance notice. Recreational equipment couldn't be unloaded in certain areas. Even residents with valid permits could be ticketed for improper display if their decal wasn't perfectly visible. But her cruelest innovation was the repeat offender escalation system. Anyone who received 3 parking violations within a 6-month period faced exponentially increasing fines. 4th offense, $500. 5th offense, $1,000. 6th offense, potential towing and a lion against their property. She was essentially extorting families out of recreational access to their own community lake. The breaking point came on a busy Saturday in July. I was sitting in my car, documenting Patricia's enforcement activities, when she approached a young mother trying to unload a stroller and diaper bag from her SUV. "Ma'am, you're parked in a loading zone," Patricia announced. "That's a $200 violation." The woman looked around confused. "Loading zone? I'm just getting my baby out of the car seat. Loading zones are for commercial deliveries only. Personal unloading requires use of designated family spaces." "Where are the family spaces?" Patricia pointed to the far end of the parking lot, at least 200 yards from the lake access. "Over there. You'll need to move your vehicle and walk back." The woman looked at her baby, then at the distance to the family spaces, then at the baby equipment she'd need to carry. "That's ridiculous. I just need 5 minutes to get organized." "Rules are rules," Patricia said, pulling out her citation book. "I can write you a ticket, or you can move your car. Your choice." I watched this young mother pack everything back into her SUV and drive to the distant family parking area, then struggle to carry her baby and equipment across the massive parking lot in 95-degree heat. That's when I decided it was time to end Patricia Hawthorne's reign of parking terror. That evening, I called Lisa Rodriguez with very specific instructions. "Lisa, effective immediately, I want you to implement enforcement modification protocols for the Lakewood HOA account." "What kind of modifications?" "Complete suspension of non-resident ticketing. Immediate cancellation of all towing authorizations. And reduction of all fine amounts to the legal minimum." There was a long pause. "Boss, that's going to cut their revenue by about 90%. The HOA board is going to go ballistic." "Let them." "And Lisa? When they call to complain, make sure they know these changes came directly from Superior Parking Solutions Management. Don't mention my name yet. You're the boss." "But Marcus, what's really going on here?" "Justice, Lisa. Sometimes you have to break a few systems to fix a bigger problem." Monday morning, Patricia's world started crumbling, and she had no idea why. I arrived at the lake parking lot at 7 a.m. and positioned myself with a clear view of Patricia's usual enforcement routine. She showed up at 7:30 sharp, clipboard in hand, ready to start her daily ticket writing campaign. But something was wrong. The first non-resident vehicle she approached, a pickup truck with kayaks, should have been an easy $150 violation. I watched Patricia walk around the truck, taking photos and checking her violation codes. Then she pulled out her phone and made a call. Even from 50 yards away, I could hear the frustration in her voice. "What do you mean the system won't let me issue non-resident citations?" "No, I'm not entering the wrong codes." "Yes, I'm sure they don't have permits." Patricia spent 20 minutes on that phone call, growing more agitated by the minute. Finally, she hung up and stormed back to her Mercedes. By noon, The Lakewood HOA office was in chaos. I knew this because at 12:15 p.m., I received a call from Lisa Rodriguez. "Marcus, you need to hear this. I just got off the phone with Patricia Hawthorne from Lakewood HOA. She is absolutely losing her mind." "What did she say?" "She's demanding to speak with the owner of Superior Parking Solutions immediately. She claims we're sabotaging their enforcement program and violating our contract. She's threatening to sue us for breach of contract and lost revenue." I couldn't help but smile. "Did you explain the contract provisions?" I tried. I told her that Superior Parking Solutions has discretionary authority over enforcement protocols and that we'd implemented policy modifications to ensure legal compliance and community safety. How did she take that? Lisa laughed. She screamed at me for 10 minutes about freeloading lake users and revenue theft. Then she demanded a face-to-face meeting with company ownership to resolve this immediately. "Set up the meeting, Lisa. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. Conference room B. Should I warn her that you're the owner?" "Absolutely not. Let it be a surprise." That evening, I prepared for what would either be the most satisfying business meeting of my career or a complete disaster that would cost me a major client. But honestly, I didn't care about the revenue anymore. Some fights are worth whatever they cost. I spent the night reviewing every document related to Patricia's parking scheme. HOA meeting minutes, enforcement statistics, resident complaints, and financial projections. What I found was a pattern of abuse that went far beyond aggressive ticketing. Patricia had been using parking fines as a weapon against political opponents within the HOA. Board members who questioned her authority found themselves facing escalating violations. Residents who complained about enforcement tactics discovered their visitor parking privileges revoked without explanation. She'd even used the system to settle personal grudges. The HOA files contained evidence that Patricia had targeted specific individuals with harassment-level enforcement because of neighborhood disputes completely unrelated to parking. But the smoking gun was an email chain between Patricia and two other board members discussing how to maximize fine revenue through strategic enforcement intensification. They'd literally plotted to increase violations by making compliance impossible. Armed with this evidence, I walked into our conference room at 2 p.m. sharp, ready to confront the woman who turned community parking into an extortion racket. Patricia Hawthorne was already seated at our conference table, along with two men I didn't recognize. She was wearing a navy blue business suit that screamed expensive lawyer, and her expression suggested she'd come for blood. "Good afternoon," I said, taking my seat at the head of the table. "I'm Marcus Davidson, CEO and owner of Superior Parking Solutions." The recognition hit Patricia like a freight train. Her face went through about 6 different colors before settling on a shade of red that suggested either rage or a stroke. "You," she whispered, pointing at me like I'd just crawled out of a sewer. "You're the one who's been sabotaging our enforcement program." "Actually, Patricia, I'm the one you hired to enforce your parking regulations, and the one you've been trying to extort for the past 6 months." One of her companions, a thin man in an expensive suit, leaned forward. "Mr. Davidson, I'm James Morrison, legal counsel for the Lakewood HOA. We're here to discuss your company's breach of contract and demand immediate restoration of enforcement protocols." I opened my laptop and pulled up Patricia's enforcement statistics. "Mr. Morrison, before we discuss breaches, let's review some numbers. In the past 6 months, your HOA has issued 2,847 parking citations totaling $427,000 in fines. Of those citations, 2,203 were issued to non-residents who had no practical way to obtain permits." James Morrison consulted his notes. "Those numbers reflect legitimate enforcement of HOA parking regulations." "Do they?" Let's look at some specific cases. I pulled up Harold Chen's file. Harold Chen, a 73-year-old resident, was fined $500 when his grandson parked for 30 minutes without pre-registering for visitor parking. The registration requirement wasn't added to HOA rules until 2 days after the citation was issued. Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Here's another one. Jennifer Martinez, a single mother and Lakewood resident, was fined $800 over 6 weeks for improper permit displays because her parking decal was positioned 2 inches too far to the right on her windshield. I clicked to the next case. And my personal favorite, Patricia Hawthorne herself issued 17 citations in one morning to residents attending a memorial service for a community member because the deceased's family failed to register all attendees for visitor parking 24 hours in advance. James Morrison was looking increasingly uncomfortable. Mr. Davidson, while these cases may seem harsh, the HOA board has legal authority to establish parking regulations for community property. You're absolutely right, Mr. Morrison. But they don't have authority to commit extortion, harassment, or discriminatory enforcement. Which brings us to why I called this meeting. I pulled out the folder containing Patricia's emails and financial projections. Patricia, would you like to explain to your lawyer how you've been using parking enforcement to settle personal vendettas and maximize revenue rather than serve legitimate community interests? Patricia's voice was barely a whisper. I don't know what you're talking about. Really? Then you won't mind if I read from your email dated June 15 to board members Linda Walsh and Robert Kim. We need to increase fine revenue by at least 30% this quarter. I suggest implementing stricter enforcement in Zones 3 and 4, particularly targeting repeat offenders who've complained about our policies. James Morrison's face went pale. Patricia, please tell me you didn't put enforcement strategies in writing. Or this one, from July 2N, the Chen family has been nothing but trouble since Harold questioned our towing authority. Let's make sure their visitor parking applications get lost for a few weeks. Patricia stood up abruptly. This meeting is over. James, we're leaving. Actually, Patricia, we're just getting started. I clicked to the next slide on my laptop. Because I have a proposition for you. She stopped halfway to the door. Sit down, and I'll explain how you're going to fix the damage you've caused to this community. Or keep walking, and I'll explain it to the district attorney's office instead. Patricia looked at her lawyer, who nodded grimly. They both returned to their seats. Here's what's going to happen, I began. Effective immediately, Superior Parking Solutions is modifying all enforcement protocols for the Lakewood HOA account. Non-resident ticketing is suspended indefinitely. All existing fines for violations prior to today are reduced to $25, payable over 6 months with no interest. You can't do that, Patricia protested. We have a contract. We do. And that contract gives Superior Parking Solutions complete discretion over enforcement methods. But here's the really interesting part, Patricia. It also includes a clause requiring quarterly performance reviews. I pulled out another document. Based on our review of your account, the Lakewood HOA has generated 17 formal complaints, 3 potential lawsuits, and 1 investigation by the county attorney's office. That's a performance failure rate of 400% above industry standards. James Morrison was frantically taking notes. What does that mean practically? It means Superior Parking Solutions is terminating our contract with Lakewood HOA for cause, effective 30 days from today. You'll need to find a new parking enforcement provider. Patricia finally found her voice. You can't terminate our contract. We've built our entire budget around parking revenue. Maybe you should have thought about that before you turned parking enforcement into a harassment campaign. I closed my laptop and stood up. Patricia, you've spent 6 months trying to extort money from families who just want to enjoy their community lake. You've targeted elderly residents, single mothers, and college students with predatory fines and impossible regulations. I looked directly into her eyes. Did you really think there would be no consequences? As Patricia and her lawyer gathered their papers, James Morrison made one last attempt at damage control. Mr. Davidson, surely we can reach some accommodation. The HOA board is willing to modify enforcement policies if Superior Parking will maintain the contract. The time for accommodation was 6 months ago, before Patricia decided to wage war on her own community. Now you get to explain to your residents why their recreational access is about to become a lot more expensive. After they left, I sat in the conference room for a long time, thinking about Harold Chen carrying his grandson's car payment to a tow lot, and that young mother struggling across a parking lot in 95-degree heat, and all the families who'd been driven away from their own community lake-by. Patricia's greed. But my revenge on Patricia Hawthorne wasn't finished. Not even close. That afternoon, I called a meeting with Lisa Rodriguez and our legal team. I want to review every parking contract we have with HOA clients. If any of them are running schemes like Patricia's, I want out. Marcus, that could cost us several million in annual revenue, Lisa warned. Lisa, some money isn't worth earning. Besides, I have a better idea for replacing that revenue. Over the next week, I implemented what I called Project Community Access. Instead of contracting with HOAs to extract maximum fines from residents, Superior Parking Solutions would offer direct services to municipalities and community organizations focused on fair, reasonable enforcement that actually served public interests. Our first client was Pine County Parks and Recreation, which hired us to manage parking for Pine Lake and 6 other recreational facilities. Our contract included provisions limiting fines to reasonable amounts, requiring clear signage and fair warning periods, and dedicating 100% of fine revenue to park maintenance and improvements. Within 30 days, we'd replaced all the revenue from HOA contracts with municipal accounts that actually served their communities instead of exploiting them. But the most satisfying part of Patricia's downfall was still to come. 2 months after terminating the Lakewood contract, I received a call from Harold Chen, the elderly man whose grandson had been towed from the community center parking lot. Mr. Davidson, I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from the county parks office. I wanted to thank you for what you did with the HOA parking situation. Mr. Chen, I'm not sure what you mean. Son, word gets around in small communities. People know you owned that parking company, and people know you stood up to Patricia Hawthorne when nobody else would. Harold paused, and I could hear emotion in his voice. My grandson is back in college now, but he still talks about that day his car got towed. He was so embarrassed, thought it was his fault for not understanding the rules. When he found out what really happened, how Patricia was targeting people, well, it meant a lot to know someone fought back. After Harold hung up, I sat in my office thinking about community and power, and the responsibility that comes with both. Patricia Hawthorne had forgotten that communities are supposed to serve people, not profit from them. 6 months later, I was kayaking on Pine Lake on a perfect Saturday morning when I saw a familiar white Mercedes parked in the lot. My blood pressure spiked for a moment before I realized Patricia was no longer a threat to anyone's weekend recreation. She was loading her own kayak onto her car, looking tired and defeated. The Lakewood HOA had voted her out of office after residents learned about her parking revenue scheme. James Morrison had dropped her as a client when the State Bar Association opened an investigation into his involvement in the enforcement harassment. Patricia had lost her position, her reputation, and according to neighborhood gossip, most of her friends in the community she'd tried to control. As I paddled past the parking lot, I could see her struggling with her kayak straps, the same way dozens of families had struggled under the weight of her predatory fines. I considered stopping to help. Patricia Hawthorne was, after all, just another person trying to enjoy the lake on a beautiful morning. But some lessons are worth learning the hard way. The Pine Lake parking lot is peaceful now. Families come and go without fear of harassment. Kids learn to fish from the dock without worrying about their parents getting tickets. Elderly residents, like Harold Chen, can have visitors without navigating a maze of bureaucratic traps. Superior Parking Solutions continues to grow, but we're selective about our clients now. We work with organizations that understand the difference between reasonable enforcement and community extortion. As for Patricia Hawthorne, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she's moved to a different community. Somewhere without an HOA, ironically enough. But the most important lesson from this whole experience isn't about parking or HOAs or even revenge. It's about power and how easy it is to abuse when you think nobody's watching. Patricia thought she was just maximizing revenue from parking violations. She didn't realize she was destroying the sense of community that makes neighborhood recreational areas special in the first place. Sometimes the person you're trying to extort turns out to own the system you're using to extort them. Sometimes the underdog has resources you never imagined. And sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys actually win. The lake is still beautiful. The parking lot serves families instead of enriching HOA board members. And somewhere in the county courthouse files is a comprehensive report documenting exactly how a small-time tyrant learned that communities are stronger than the people who try to exploit them. But that's not the end of the story. Because 6 months after Patricia's defeat, I discovered something that connected her parking scheme to a much larger conspiracy involving municipal contracts, political corruption, and fraud that reached all the way to the state legislature. That investigation is still ongoing, and the story it's uncovered would make Patricia's parking scheme look like a small-town sideshow. But I'll save that story for another day.